What's up, noobs? I don't think enough people mention the lighting and atmosphere in a game, and especially considering how important it is. It's the difference between walking into a restaurant with fluorescent ceiling lights, plastic chairs, and flies on the walls versus warm, incandescent light bulbs, mahogany tables, and cozy armchairs. No matter how good everything else is, the vibe still matters. So let's start with Act 1. I think it sucks. It's 12 o'clock daylight with the full concentrated power of the sun. Literally the worst lighting and time of day for anything to look good. The shadows are too hard, the colors are too saturated, and it just looks very childish. Especially the camp scenes look horrible. Just look at Astarion's hair and the weird white highlights going on in their faces. I understand why they chose the most neutral time of day, gameplay-wise and logically, but I think it's worth to swap out logic for beauty in this instance. Just making it a little later or earlier in the day would make a big difference. Or what about just adding some haziness, light streaks through the trees, or anything to give it some atmosphere? I mean, imagine instead of it being in the middle of the day when you wake up in camp, it's early sunrise. Or when you go back to camp when you've used both your short rests at sunset. I think even if you would go away from camp and it being in the middle of the day again, that would be alright. And it would be a great indication of you having to take a long rest. And it would just look so much more beautiful. For those of you who are not super versed in color and lighting, let's take a closer look to fully understand what I mean. Look at the colors on the original versus the colors if I just tone it a little bit down. It doesn't have to be a lot, the lighting is even exactly the same, it's just the color grade that I changed, but it still looks a lot better. And another part of it that makes the original look less interesting is that the color grading is so neutral. You see, when I make the highlights slightly warmer or even slightly colder, it adds a mood to the picture. There's a vibe and a feeling here that pulls you into the story. The original has too much contrast between shadows and light, but is lacking contrast in what is closer or further away from the camera, which would add more depth and a sense of space. What is closer should be darker and more saturated, and what's further away should get brighter and cooler. This, however, gives me kindergarten. But the nighttime camp scenes are nice enough. The soft, cool lighting paired with the glow from the fire gives off a romantic feeling, which fits a lot of the scenes here. And there are some instances of nice lighting inside in Act 1, especially in caves and in the grove with the warmth from the fire or the little luminescent blue lights adding some cool highlights. There is one and only one place where I like the lighting outside, and that is in Rosy Morn. The time of day is a little later, so the sun is much warmer. I do still have a couple of issues when you're out in the sun and the shadows are still kind of hard, but both the environment and lighting here is so much better. Walking around in the monastery with the light streaks through the windows and the view over mountains and ruins are gorgeous. My biggest issue here is that it's too small a map. The first time I got here, I was ready to start exploring all the ruins you could see from the view, but that's not possible, and I think it's sad that one of the most beautiful areas in the whole game is so short. On the whole, most of Act 1 is pretty ugly or boring to me, especially outside, but the Underdark, however, I really like. It's mysterious and eerie, and the glowing spores and mushrooms add a bit of allure and otherworldliness that I think is spot on for this location. And not to mention the winner of lighting for me is in the Underdark, the Grimforge. Just look at them. So warm, so glowy, so sweaty. I always pause to chat here because I love this lighting so much. Just look at that. Even the camp scenes are better at the Grimforge. And yes, I did go back from the Shadow Curse after having advanced the romance, just to have an epic kissing scene in this lighting. This is actually one place where the saturation makes sense and it actually looks good. The lava is lighting up the whole area with indirect light, which is why they look so glowy. And with the color grade being super warm and the smoke and embers in the air all together creates an intriguing atmosphere. I think Act 2 is quite similar to the Underdark, and you know what, Gale? I agree with you. We do look irresistible in this gloomy light. Again, it's mysterious, foreboding, and it really immerses you in the world and the mood of this act. I think it's tinged a bit greener than the Underdark, which adds a bit more magic to it, which is fitting considering the story. All in all, Act 2 is great. Act 3 is basically back to Act 1, only slightly better. Judging by the shadows, it looks like it might be a little bit later in the day, but the lighting isn't as warm as in Rosy Morn, so it's not that vibey to me. But the fact that you are in a city, there's not much greenery here, so the colors don't appear as saturated and harsh. Also, being surrounded by buildings adds more indirect light that is a bit softer, which I think helps. Looking out over a vast city is always cool, but it only really looks kind of atmospheric because of the natural haziness objects get when they are far away. Other than that, it's not that great. It doesn't really wow me or immerse me, which should be considered a fail. Although this kiss scene looks kinda nice, it's just because I'm crazy, and I look for good lighting to have cutscenes in, like this dappled sunlight through the trees. Or just 1 second. Yes, better. The only lighting I think is absolutely stunning in this act is when you meet the Elder Brain for the first time and try to take control of it with the stones. There's this red, pinkish glow, and I think there is a bloom effect on the character that makes them look super beautiful. But you only get this lighting during the cutscene, so it doesn't really count. So, does Baldur's Gate 3 pass the vibe check? Well, I mean, kind of. It is super atmospheric and beautiful at times, and other times downright ugly. And let's not kid ourselves, this is a game, which means they have the means to add any type of lighting they want at any time. It doesn't even need to be realistic. Although I appreciate a lot of the atmosphere in Act 2 and the Underdark, I would have liked to see more scenes during Golden Hour, Twilight, Sunrise, or Sunset. I mean, the 6 months later scene should have been in the sunset, in my opinion. Yes, after defeating the brain, the scene is at sunrise, but I'm talking mostly about being able to play in a nice atmosphere. The kind where you stop and look around at how beautiful everything is. The only place I ever did that was in Rosymorn, and I never did it again for the rest of the game. They've nailed the dark, moody vibe, but where are my sparkly, serene vibes? Or my mist, my glow, my rainy drizzle? I would even settle for a rainbow at this point. But vibes aren't solely based on the visuals. The amazing score and story of the game makes Baldur's Gate incredibly immersive and captivating. But I think that's why the ugly lighting and color grading annoys me even more. Especially when I know they can do moody and interesting, like in Act 2 and for a lot of the cutscenes. So why isn't the rest of the game gorgeous? If games are anything like movies, what people remember the most is the beginning and the end. And those are the two acts with the ugliest lighting in the whole game. I think honestly my biggest issue is the contrast level and saturation in this game. If you look at Act 3, the lighting actually isn't bad, but it doesn't look nice because of the colors and how harsh everything appears. And the lack of atmosphere in the scenery makes it look very flat with no vibe or mood. Conclusion, Baldur's Gate 3 is a great game and honestly one of my favorites, but it doesn't pass the vibe check. I know it's beautiful sometimes, but it just doesn't cut it when it can also be that ugly. As Tav so nicely puts it, this view is almost worth the walk. But what do you think? Agree, disagree, or any beautiful looking areas you think I missed? Let me know. That's it. Vanoobie out.